Imagine stepping beyond the gates of Neverland Ranch, not as a starstruck guest, but as someone with an all-access pass to the secret life of the King of Pop. For years, Michael Jackson's sprawling estate in Santa Barbara County captured the imaginations of millions with its carnival rides, exotic animals, and fairy tale landscapes. To the world, Neverland was Jackson's escape, a place where he could relive the childhood he felt he'd lost. But for those who worked behind the scenes, the reality of Neverland was far stranger and far darker than anyone could imagine. Recently, a former maid from Jackson's inner circle came forward with claims that have left fans reeling. She witnessed things no one outside the ranch would believe: ritualistic routines, bizarre demands, and secret rooms hidden away from even the closest family members. These weren't the innocent quirks of a musical genius, but revelations that could change how we remember him. Jackson was known for his eccentricities, but the maid's shocking account suggests there were sides to the King of Pop that the public never knew, and perhaps were never meant to know. What was hidden in those secret rooms? Why was the staff sworn to absolute secrecy even with each other? And why did Jackson go to such extreme lengths to control every aspect of his surroundings? Today we're taking you beyond the glitzy headlines and the polished interviews. We'll uncover the side of Neverland that only a few were ever allowed to see. The Maid story sheds light on what really happened in this isolated paradise, giving us a glimpse into a world where reality and fantasy were blurred beyond recognition. Prepare yourself, because this isn't the Michael Jackson that the cameras captured. This is the story of a world only whispered about finally coming to light. Neverland Ranch wasn't just a home, it was a world carefully crafted by Michael Jackson himself, a place where reality was left at the gate. Spanning over 2,700 acres, this sprawling estate had everything from a private amusement park with Ferris wheels and roller coasters to a zoo with exotic animals roaming freely. To the outside world, Neverland was more than an estate. It was a fantasy land, an escape from reality that suited Jackson's childlike wonder. Fans would gather at the gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the superstar, or just to feel close to the magic he'd created. But as magical as it seemed, there was another side to Neverland that very few saw. While it was easy to be dazzled by the grandiose rides and lavish landscapes, those who worked there had a different perspective. Behind the gates, far from the fanfare, Jackson's private life unfolded, full of strict routines, secluded areas, and unspoken rules. Former Maid described the estate as a strange, almost surreal world, where what lay beneath the surface was far more complex and, at times, disturbing than the public facade. Even for those on the inside, Jackson maintained a shroud of mystery around his daily life. The Maid hinted that the fantasy of Neverland was not just a dream for Michael, it was a world where he could control everything and everyone around him, and with that control came secrets, ones that he was determined to keep hidden, even from some of his own family members. To the world, Neverland might have seemed like the ultimate playground, but to those who lived within its gates, it was clear that it held layers of secrets, ones Jackson guarded fiercely. And for the Maid, seeing the hidden side of Neverland day after day began to reveal just how far Jackson went to create and protect this surreal kingdom. But the secrets she would later uncover were only just beginning. Beyond the gates of Neverland, where fantasy met reality, there was one unbreakable rule: everything had to be perfect. According to the former Maid, Michael Jackson's obsession with cleanliness wasn't just a quirk, it was a strict, unwavering demand. She described a daily routine that went far beyond what most people would consider neat or tidy. Everything from the arrangement of furniture to the shine on a glass table had to meet his exacting standards. Nothing was ever left to chance. Jackson reportedly went so far as to have his staff follow unusual protocols to keep things spotless. The Maid recalled that every surface had to be wiped down multiple times a day, even if it hadn't been touched. The floors were polished until they gleamed, and nothing was allowed to be out of place. Not a single fingerprint, not a speck of dust. It wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about absolute control over his surroundings. According to the Maid, he would even check rooms himself, inspecting every detail to make sure it met his standards. But it wasn't only the rooms and furniture that Jackson kept spotless. He reportedly held those around him to similar standards: family members, close friends, even staff. Everyone was expected to respect his rules on cleanliness and order. Some visitors were even required to go through specific routines before entering his personal spaces, as if he were protecting an unseen boundary around his world. This obsession wasn't just a habit. The Maid suggested it was almost ritualistic, a routine that bordered on compulsion. She hinted that it was as if Jackson believed that keeping his environment pristine was a way to keep control over the parts of his life that seemed to be slipping away. For someone with the weight of fame fame on his shoulders, perhaps this was his way of finding stability in a world he couldn't always control. But what lay beneath this drive for order? The maid would soon uncover even stranger rituals that went beyond cleanliness, leading her to question just what he was trying to hide. As the maid became more familiar with the vast halls and hidden corners of Neverland, she began to notice certain areas that were off limits, rooms that no one was allowed to enter except Michael himself. These so-called secret rooms weren't on any map of the estate, nor were they ever discussed among the staff. According to the maid, these rooms seemed to hold a level of privacy beyond even Jackson's strict standards. They were hidden away, sometimes locked, and always shrouded in mystery. One particular room stood out. It was tucked away in a secluded part of the estate with no windows and a lock that only Jackson himself could access. The maid described it as a place he would often disappear to, staying there for hours on end. No one ever asked what he did there, and no one dared to. The secrecy surrounding these rooms became almost like a rule of its own, an unspoken boundary that separated the fantasy of Neverland from something else, something only Jackson understood. Rumors circulated among the staff about what these hidden rooms could contain. Some believed they held rare and valuable possessions, items that Jackson wanted to keep safe from prying eyes. Others suspected these rooms were a retreat for the star, a place where he could escape the pressures of his fame. But the maid hinted at something more. She spoke of feeling a strange energy around these spaces, as if they held secrets not meant to be shared. As the months went on, her curiosity grew, and the secrecy surrounding these rooms only intensified. She claimed that even family members were kept in the dark about their purpose, and some areas were said to be completely off limits even to them. For Jackson, these rooms were sanctuaries of solitude, places he fiercely protected from the outside world. But what was he hiding in these hidden chambers? And why did he guard them so closely? The maid's suspicions were growing, and soon she would discover that the mysteries of Neverland ran deeper than she ever expected. What she uncovered next would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about the King of Pop. As the maid continued her work at Neverland, she began to observe something peculiar about Michael Jackson's daily routines. These weren't just the habits of a celebrity with a busy schedule. They were specific, almost ritualistic routines that seemed to hold a deeper significance. According to the maid, Jackson would dedicate hours to these routines, following strict guidelines as if every step had a purpose only he understood. Each day unfolded with a sense of order that bordered on obsession. One of these routines involved his appearance. Every morning, the staff would prepare his personal spaces with an almost ceremonial precision. Mirrors had to be polished to perfection, his clothes laid out just right, and any item that Jackson used regularly was to be meticulously placed exactly as he wanted. The maid hinted that even a minor deviation would cause frustration, leading him to demand that it be done right. It was as though he believed these routines held some kind of control over his life, control he desperately clung to. Another ritual involved his private garden. Jackson would often take solitary walks there, sometimes in the early hours when everyone else was asleep. The maid described these walks as quiet and intense, like a form of meditation. He would pace slowly, touching certain plants and murmuring to himself as if he were in a trance. Staff members learned to steer clear during these times, respecting this deeply personal ritual without question. The routines didn't stop there. From the exact temperature in his rooms to the order of his meals, everything was regulated to the smallest detail. To an outsider, these habits might seem unusual, but to those inside Neverland, they were just another piece of the puzzle. For the maid, however, these routines went beyond eccentricity. She sensed that they were a shield Jackson used to guard himself from the chaos that came with his fame, a way to find peace and stability within his carefully constructed world. But as the maid would soon discover, there was more to these routines than just a need for order. They hinted at a deeper struggle, an internal battle that perhaps even Jackson himself couldn't fully explain. And as she continued her work, she realized that the reasons behind these rituals were connected to secrets that ran deeper than she could have ever anticipated. As time went on, the maid became acutely aware of one rule at Neverland that overshadowed all others: silence. According to her, a strict culture of secrecy loomed over everyone who worked there. Each employee was required to sign a confidentiality agreement, but it wasn't just a legal formality, it was an unbreakable code. The maid recalled how Jackson would stress, directly and indirectly, that his private life was never to leave the estate. Conversations about his habits, routines, and personal preferences were strictly off limits, not just to the press, but even to close friends and family. For Jackson, privacy wasn't just important, it was sacred. The maid explained that it went beyond just signing a contract. There was an unspoken understanding among the staff that even whispering about certain parts of Jackson's life could mean immediate dismissal. Many staff members kept to themselves, forming no close connections, as trust was a rare commodity at Neverland. Conversations were kept short, and everyone quickly learned to avoid mentioning anything they saw or heard in Jackson's presence. The secrecy extended into the very walls of Neverland. Some areas, like the infamous secret rooms, were strictly off limits to anyone but Jackson, and staff were forbidden from even cleaning them without explicit permission. Rumors spread about why certain rooms were so closely guarded, but no one dared ask. Jackson had a way of keeping everyone in line, not through intimidation, but through an almost mystical sense of authority, a quiet reminder that he was always watching. The Maid hinted that this culture of secrecy didn't just protect Jackson's privacy, it protected the delicate image he projected to the world. After all, the King of Pop wasn't just a musician, he was a symbol, an icon that millions adored. Any details that contradicted this image were locked away, hidden behind the walls of Neverland. But as the Maid would soon find out, the secrets that Jackson guarded weren't just personal, they were deeply intertwined with the very identity he had worked so hard to protect. And as the veil of secrecy began to lift, she realized that even his most loyal servants could only be silent for so long. As the Maid continued her daily duties within Neverland's opulent surroundings, she began to notice something odd about Michael Jackson's relationship with his possessions, and even more so with his money. Despite his extraordinary wealth and lavish lifestyle, Jackson held an almost obsessive attachment to certain objects, treating them with an unusual level of care. The Maid observed how he would occasionally bring out prized items from his personal collection, whether it was a rare book, a piece of memorabilia, or even a small trinket that he'd kept for years. Each piece seemed to hold a deep significance, a story only Jackson understood. But Jackson's relationship with money itself was far more complicated. Despite his fortune, the Maid noticed that he often kept cash hidden in odd places around the estate, from drawers in his bedroom to safes in secluded rooms. She recalled how he would check on these stashes regularly, as if he needed to reassure himself of their presence. It wasn't just wealth he sought, he seemed to seek a sense of security from his possessions and the money he had physically around him. For the staff, his attachment to money and objects was puzzling, especially given his superstar status. Jackson could have had anything he wanted, but he chose to keep certain items close, hidden away as if they were part of a carefully guarded secret. He was known to collect art, antiques, and memorabilia, often paying astounding prices for items that fascinated him, and yet he rarely flaunted these items publicly, choosing instead to keep them locked away in the privacy of his estate. The Maid hinted that these behaviors revealed a side of Jackson that few understood. For someone who appeared to have it all, Jackson seemed to be clinging to physical objects and cash, as if they represented something he felt he was missing. Perhaps for Jackson, these possessions were anchors in a life that often felt out of his control, a way to reclaim stability in the face of unimaginable fame and fortune. But what drove him to hold onto these things so tightly? Was it the need for security, or was it something deeper, an attempt to fill a void that even his fame couldn't satisfy? The Maid didn't have all the answers, but as she continued her work, she began to realize that Jackson's life was filled with mysteries far more complex than anyone could have imagined. And as she pieced together the clues, she would soon uncover a side of Jackson that had remained hidden in plain sight. After years of silence, the Maid finally spoke out about the secrets she witnessed within Neverland's walls, revelations that were far from the magical image the world had of Michael Jackson. She recounted details that left even the most loyal fans in disbelief, describing moments that felt surreal, as if they were lifted from a twisted fairy tale. She spoke of Jackson's private quarters, where unusual collections and bizarre habits blurred the line between reality and fantasy. One of the most shocking claims she revealed was about Jackson's peculiar lifestyle habits. While he presented a public persona of polished perfection, the Maid described a side of him that few would recognize. According to her, there were areas of the house that Jackson himself seemed to leave in a state that was anything but pristine, hidden spaces that seemed like another world entirely, untouched and forgotten. It was as if Jackson held a dual existence within his own estate, balancing between the image he shared with the world and the secrets he kept to himself. The Maid went on to describe a series of unsettling routines, moments that left her questioning Jackson's grip on reality. She hinted that these rituals and collections weren't merely hobbies or eccentricities. They were part of a lifestyle that grew more intense over the years, ultimately creating an atmosphere of isolation and mystery. To those who lived and worked within Neverland, Jackson's behavior became a source of constant speculation and intrigue. But perhaps the most unsettling part of her story was the sense of darkness that seemed to grow within Jackson's private life. The Maid described a man haunted haunted by his own inner struggles, a side of Jackson that he kept carefully hidden from his fans and even from his closest confidants. She suggested that these dirty secrets were not just physical or behavioral, they were emotional, a reflection of a man deeply torn between his public image and his private self. These revelations challenged the myth of Neverland and cast a new light on the man behind the music. For the Maid, telling her story was more than just revealing secrets. It was a way to show the world that even icons have shadows, parts of themselves they can't escape, no matter how carefully they try to hide them. But with these secrets out in the open, what are we left to believe about the King of Pop? Is this the real Michael Jackson, or merely another layer of a complex life we may never fully on these revelations? It's clear that Michael Jackson was a man of many layers, someone who carefully crafted an image that the world adored, but kept parts of himself hidden away in the shadows of Neverland. From the pristine fantasy he shared with the world, to the secrets and struggles he concealed, Jackson's life was as complex as it was captivating. The stories from his former maid reveal a man who lived in two worlds, one that dazzled millions and another that remained locked behind closed doors. These insights force us to confront the duality of fame, the King of Pop, beloved by fans, and the man who lived a secluded, mysterious life filled with routines and rituals that only a few would ever understand. Perhaps these dirty secrets weren't just elements of an eccentric lifestyle, but pieces of a puzzle that hinted at his deeper search for identity, security, and control in a world that rarely allowed him peace. So as we close the gates on Neverland once more, we're left to wonder, was Michael Jackson's life a dream that became a prison? And how much of his story remains untold? One thing's for certain, the magic of Neverland may have been a mask, but behind it lay the complicated and extraordinary life of a man the world will never truly understand. What do you think? Was Michael Jackson a misunderstood genius, or was there more to his story than we'll ever know? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for joining us in uncovering the secrets of Neverland.